Be me. 30. A powerful, self-actualized woman. Finally, the prime of my life. CEO track at a major corporate firm. 7-figure net worth potential by 40, zero tolerance for male mediocrity. 24s were for building my empire, not changing diapers or fetching sandwiches. I earned this. The world owes me recognition for my efforts and accomplishments. I remember turning 25, feeling like I had cracked the code. All the pathetic girls getting married right out of college, rushing to breed and become subservient domestic labor units. I pitied them, truly. They chose submission. I chose power. I chose the boardroom. They chose the laundry room. And now, 5 years later, they're trapped in their little suburban prisons with their average low-status husbands. I am free. I am the prize. But lately, the freedom has started to feel quiet. It's not the roaring silence of power I expected. It's just quiet. The only sound is the expensive automatic coffee machine in my 14th floor apartment humming at 6 a.m., and the sound of my own footsteps echoing on the polished concrete floors. I remember the last birthday party I attended for one of those suburban girls. She was turning 29, pregnant with her second. She looked tired, puffy, smiling that vacant, motherly smile. I arrived late, dressed in a sharp, tailored pantsuit, radiating success and confidence. I made a point of discussing my latest promotion, the size of my bonus, and the impending business trip to Dubai. Her husband, a kind of bland, beige man, just kept nodding and holding the platter of store-bought cookies. I felt a deep, satisfying surge of triumph. I won. I definitely won. But last week, I went to a networking event. I was the most successful person in the room, easily. I had my talking points ready: metrics, synergy, market disruption. I wore the new power suit, charcoal gray, perfectly fitted. I expected the usual reaction from the high-value men, a mix of awe and slight intimidation, followed by a chase. But the men, the ones I deemed worthy of even a momentary conversation, they weren't interested. They were talking to the 22-year-old marketing intern, the one wearing a fluttery dress and laughing a lot. I watched them. They weren't talking about KPIs or Q3 projections. They were talking about stupid, trivial things: skiing, concerts, where to get the best craft beer. The men looked relaxed, interested in the act of flirting, not the potential for professional leverage. I tried to interrupt one conversation, steering it toward my recent success in restructuring the acquisitions department. The high-status VP smiled politely, nodded, and then just turned back to the intern. He didn't even register me as competition or a professional equal. He registered me as a buzzkill, a liability to the good vibes. The realization hit me like a splash of cold, bitter coffee. They weren't intimidated by my power. They were uninterested in my power. My accomplishments, which had been my entire identity for a decade, were apparently irrelevant in this context. I went home and stared in the mirror. 30. Still physically attractive, of course, the result of expensive skincare and high-intensity gym sessions. But the energy felt different. The playful, effortless glow of the early 20s was gone, replaced by a certain sharpness, a guarded look, the look of a woman who has been fighting in the corporate trenches for years. It's the look of competence, yes, but also of fatigue. I decided the problem wasn't me. It was the scarcity of quality men. They're all weak, emotionally stunted, afraid of a strong woman. They want a meek, easily controllable child bride who will validate their fragile egos. I laughed at the thought. I would never settle for such pathetic validation. I downloaded a dating app, something I hadn't seriously used since 27. I set my filters high, non-negotiable standards. Minimum 6 figures, minimum 6 feet 0 inches, professional degree, no history of traditionalism. The profiles started rolling in. The first few days were fine, a few promising matches, exchanging witty, intellectually sparring messages. But every time the conversation shifted from an interview to actual dating, it went south. I scheduled a date with a lawyer, a man who seemed to have everything. We met at an upscale cocktail bar. I started the conversation with a critical analysis of the current political climate, demanding his views on systemic inequality. I wanted to see if he was intellectually rigorous enough for me. He just laughed, a soft, easy laugh, said, "Wow, right into the deep end, huh?" I was hoping we could talk about maybe what kind of wine you like. I felt rage bubble up. I am not here to discuss trivialities, Richard. I am looking for a partner, an equal, someone who is engaged with the serious issues facing our world. He took a sip of his bourbon and looked me directly in the eyes. And I'm looking for someone I can relax with. Good luck with your search. He paid for his drink and left. Just like that. No chase, no apology, no argument. He simply decided I wasn't worth the effort, the audacity, the utter disrespect for my time and my intellectual superiority. I went on 10 more dates like that over the next 3 months. Each man, successful in his own right, seemed to view me not as a prize, but as a test. And they all failed me. No, wait, they all failed the test. They were weak. But the pool of candidates was shrinking, and my matches were becoming less impressive. The 6-figure minimum was starting to net me guys who were 38, slightly balding, and clearly desperate. I started seeing profiles of men I had rejected years ago, men who had tried too hard in their 20s. They were now successful, well-adjusted, and dating women who were decidedly not me. It made no sense. They were supposed to be suffering, wandering the earth directionless because they didn't have a strong woman to guide them. I remembered one man specifically. Mark. He was an engineer, met him when I was 26. He was a sweet, slightly nerdy guy, always talking about his side project, a ridiculous non-corporate project involving, independent game development. I had publicly humiliated him in front of my girlfriends at a party. I asked him why he wasn't pursuing a more serious career path. I told him his little side hustle was cute, but real men provide and build legacy in the real world. He had gone pale, said something about finding fulfillment outside of consumerist competition, and then just stopped calling. I told my friends he was a walking red flag, a loser who would never achieve anything because he rejected the hustle, a MG Tao, or whatever those pathetic little clubs called themselves. I saw his name pop up a few months ago in a business journal, a small feature on innovative indie companies. I scoffed, probably clickbait. Now, at 30, the casual rejections were taking a toll. The constant feeling of being judged and found wanting, not for my looks or my professional success, but for my spirit. I was radiating resentment. I knew it. I could feel it radiating from my pores like cheap perfume. I was starting to see the women my age who had married young. They didn't look tired anymore. They looked content. They had soft lives, supportive husbands, and the stability I had deferred for a decade. I watched one of them at a park, playing with her 3-year-old. She wasn't working. She wasn't pitching. She wasn't restructuring. She was just being. And a deep, venomous jealousy started to eat away at my soul. I had sacrificed everything for this pedestal of corporate success. I thought men would climb over each other to worship me there, but they just walked past the pedestal and picked up the cute girl sitting on the bench next to the park. I started drinking more during the week. Not sloppy drunk, but enough to take the edge off the relentless quiet of the apartment. The constant reminder of the choices I made, the choices I had forced others to make, only to discover I was the only one trapped by them. My female colleagues, the ones who were a few years ahead of me, were starting to look desperate too. They were rushing to freeze their eggs, dating men 10 years younger, trying to buy back the time they had spent on the hustle. I felt a cold fear. I was becoming one of them, a high-value, high-earning, high-maintenance woman with no one to share it with, except my assistant, who only spoke to me in short, panicked sentences. I decided I needed a change. I needed to lower my standards, just a little. Maybe that lawyer was right. Maybe I should just try to have fun. I went on a date with a genuinely nice, attractive man who was a school teacher. He was sweet, kind, interested in my life, but he made $75,000 a year. I sat there, staring at his hands, thinking about how his salary was half my yearly bonus, how his life was so small, so contained, so teacherly. The intellectual part of my brain screamed, "This is a good man. He is stable. He is kind." The conditioned, entitled part of my brain screamed louder, "He is not worthy of your empire. He cannot provide the prestige you deserve." I ended the date early, citing a sudden, urgent work call. He looked disappointed, not angry. That disappointed puppy dog look was somehow worse than the anger. It confirmed my belief that I was too much for these small men. I retreated back to my fortress of solitude and success. I started getting emails from a headhunter about a new role, chief operating officer at a small, rapidly growing tech company. It was huge, exactly the kind of leap I needed to cement my position as an alpha female in the corporate world. The company was called Vast Horizons Games. The name sounded familiar, annoyingly so. I researched the founder, the CEO. The name was Mark. I stared at the screen, heart pounding with a sudden, ugly mix of terror and disbelief. It was him. Mark, the nerdy engineer I had mocked for his cute little side hustle 6 years ago. He had not only pursued the ridiculous, non-corporate path, he had succeeded. The article described him as a visionary, a genius, a man who had built a multi-million-dollar company focused on fulfillment over consumerism. The irony was a physical pain. He had built a company that rejected the very principles I had dedicated my life to, and it had worked. He had found the independence I had only ever dreamed of, the total financial and creative control. And he did it without me, without the corporate ladder, without the validation of my approval. He didn't need my prestige or my six-figure salary. He was the ultimate prize, now completely unattainable. I called the headhunter, my voice shaking but trying to sound firm. Tell me about the corporate culture. Is it serious? Is it focused on market dominance? The headhunter, a crisp professional man, laughed. Oh, not at all. They're very unique. Mark, the CEO, runs the company on a 4-day work week. He believes in minimal meetings, complete creative freedom, and prioritizing life over work. I hung up. I couldn't work for him. The humiliation would be too much. To submit my impeccable corporate resume to the man I had labeled a loser. To be judged by the man who had gone his own way, avoiding the entire system I had excelled in. He hadn't been waiting for me to catch up. He had simply left the track I was running on. I realized his quiet departure from the competition wasn't a failure. It was the ultimate, passive-aggressive victory. He hadn't needed to argue with me about my careerism or my feminist principles. He just built a better life that proved my principles wrong. My core belief that women must dominate men in the boardroom to find true value was a lie. My true value, the one that mattered to the men I secretly wanted, was being wasted on quarterly reports and hostile takeovers. I pulled up his company's social media. The pictures weren't of fancy offices or tailored suits. They were pictures of Mark, looking genuinely happy, traveling with a gorgeous, smiling woman. She wasn't a CEO. She wasn't a lawyer or an investment banker. She was an artist, a creator, someone who smiled easily and wore comfortable, flowing clothes. The woman was beautiful, relaxed, and clearly valued for who she was, not what she achieved. And she was 5 years younger than me. It wasn't a competition I could win with my resume. My 30th birthday arrived a few weeks later. I hosted a party in my apartment, a mandatory networking event disguised as a celebration. My corporate friends showed up talking about mergers and acquisitions, sipping expensive champagne. But the high-value men I invited all had convenient, last-minute cancellations. They were somewhere else. Not intimidated, just busy. I watched my reflection in the dark glass of the apartment windows. Sharp, tailored, successful, and utterly alone. The triumphant silence was a deafening roar of emptiness. I finally understood the melting feeling. It wasn't just the aging, it was the realization of the scam. The feminist doctrine had told me that the pursuit of male validation through corporate domination was the ultimate freedom. It was a lie. It was a treadmill that led nowhere but a quiet apartment on the 14th floor at 30. Mark hadn't just succeeded. He had built a life on the antithesis of everything I believed. He went his own way, and his reward was genuine happiness and partnership. My reward was a corner office and the faint, bitter smell of yesterday's expensive whiskey. I stood there alone, with a glass of champagne in my hand, looking down at the city, my empire, my prison. The glass slipped from my hand, shattering on the polished concrete. I didn't bother to clean it up. The noise of the break was the only genuine sound I had heard all night, the sound of something finally giving way. I hadn't outsmarted the system. I had been tricked into thinking the system was the game, and the man who walked away from the board was the only one who won. It was just the quiet, echoing, miserable truth.